Happy Thanksgiving, Ryan.
Hey, buddy. Happy Thanksgiving to you.
It is a wonderful time of the year.
It's a great time.
We had some snow.
For gaining weight.
Ooh. That's true. So Thanksgiving has just passed. We're in the Advent season, and Christmas is coming.
Yeah, it is legal now to say Merry Christmas.
No, it's been legal since November. I mean,
really?
Yeah. I don't do the whole wait after Thanksgiving, all that stuff. It's Merry Christmas.
I know. We talked last time about how we decorated our homes, but I just didn't know if it was as you say hello to folks. Do you say Happy Holidays? Do you say Merry Christmas?
You say Merry Christmas. If you're American, you say Merry Christmas.
Did you say Happy Thanksgiving?
If you're scared, I woke up and choose violence today. If you're a coward and you say Happy Holidays, get off my porch. It's Merry Christmas.
Did you say Happy Thanksgiving to anyone?
Like in text message or like
no? I
audible?
mean, I don't know. Yeah, when you saw people.
I don't really say Happy Thanksgiving.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. Yeah, I did.
I don't.
I traveled, and we stayed in a hotel this time, and I caught myself talking to randos in the hotel, and I said it Happy Thanksgiving the day before and the day of to just people as I was greeting them Happy Thanksgiving, but I don't think I say that on the regular.
I don't cognitively think about saying Happy Thanksgiving. It's not a thing.
Yeah. Well,
I didn't grow up thinking.
You probably said it to your family, surely. Not really.
No, I mean, I don't wake up like, hey, baby, Happy Thanksgiving.
I do. It's the first words out of my mouth. Where's the turkey? That's the first thing I said.
Hey, hot take. We can talk about this after the intro, but I'm a ham guy over turkey. We should start doing ham instead of turkey on Thanksgiving.
Hey,
I said it.
That's not that heretical. We do both.
Really?
Yep.
That's nice.
Yeah, it was nice, but man, my cousins each did. One cousin did a deep fried turkey, and the other did a smoked turkey, and both were out of control. I mean, there's a huge number of people. I mean, like 20 people. So that's why we had 2 turkeys and ham,
Nice.
and we had it all. But I don't. There are people who are anti-turkey.
I have seen this year more than anything from our Facebook feed prime rib for Thanksgiving. A lot of people are doing prime rib instead of turkey. I was like, what the? I didn't know that was a thing this year.
I didn't know that. I've seen that for holidays. I don't know that I necessarily noted that it was for.
I want to say at least 4 to 5
for Thanksgiving
people that we follow.
Yeah,
had prime rib instead of turkey.
Man, I've never made a prime rib, but the ways they do it with the string and the juicy. Oh gosh, it looks good.
Welcome to the podcast.
You're listening to a local church podcast hosted by my dad, Pastor Ryan Markham. Be sure to leave a review and share this resource. Love God, love people, make disciples.
Did you watch any football?
I watched Kentucky and Louisville game
That's
yesterday.
not where I wanted this to go.
So we can talk about that. Or I don't really watch a lot of NFL, right?
Okay.
I did watch the Michigan game.
Yes.
Ohio
that was
State.
Crazy.
Trying to plant a flag in the middle of the field.
I was running my mouth all weekend long about like ESPN and all the channels or whatever were like hyping that game up. And I was like, how can you even hype this game? Michigan is off this season. Ohio State's number 2. What's the point? Why would you even make this the game of the weekend or the game of the year and blah, blah, blah? And, man, it turned out to be huge.
There was a bunch of rival games, right, this weekend.
Oh, yeah. Rivalry
Texas had a big game.
Yeah. That Texas or that Georgia Tech game was crazy.
Did you watch the Duke game?
It went to 7 overtimes.
Oh, yeah. 8 overtimes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I did not watch any of it.
I watched all of that. That was really exciting.
I kept getting bleeps on my phone from Twitter, from X, and I was like, hey, another overtime. I was like, okay. I have no dog in the fight.
Nah. I mean, it was just, I care because I like the SEC and, who's going to make it into the playoffs and all that stuff. And, if Georgia had lost that game, they would,
What does that do to Ohio State, though, with their loss?
It knocked them out.
Because they were in the conversation.
Yeah,
right?
I think they still are. Technically, it knocked them out of their conference championship. I think, and then that means they have to get an at-large bid and all the other business, which knocks somebody else out. It's all going to come out, I think, tomorrow or Tuesday.
Yeah, just going to throw the loop at you. Are they going to fire Stoops?
Oh, we talked about that this morning. Me and some friends. There are people who are off of Stoops for losing to Kentucky.
Last year was like, man, we got the best coach ever. And this year it's like, no, we're going to fire him.
That's what I said I was playing devil's advocate in that same conversation because, like, we went from Joker Phillips, I think he was Kentucky's last coach, to Bob Stoops or Mark Stoops. And everybody's like, he is the next guy.
He's the next
great. Guy. And he's had some okay years and things seem to turn around. And then this year we're 4-8 or whatever we are and didn't make a bowl. And it's like, okay, we're done. So rough. To buy him out, it's $44 million.
They're not going to do that. I mean, they already bought Calipari out. They're not going to buy another coach out. I don't think you can afford it.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, you can afford it.
We're in the Pope era here in Kentucky. It's like,
oh no, we don't have a football team. We're basketball school. Like we're totally basketball.
We get it. Kind of been that way all along, but I mean, now that Pope is undefeated at this point, everybody's like, whoa, this matters again, and now we're off of Stoops. So
it's amazing. It's amazing the social media feeds for sports and what's happening. But today. We're going to jump back into it, right? We've got a lot of
the point of this podcast, you mean it's not food and sports?
Yeah, no, it's not.
If you're listening for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah. All we've talked about in this show so far is food and sports.
There should probably be a podcast in the future just about food and sports. But we typically do concise theology, right? We've been walking through that.
Yes.
Look at the sermon. We look at things that are upcoming, a teaser or two about movies, things like that. I do want to talk about something. I'm really big into Interstellar, the movie. Everybody knows, right? I've talked about this on multiple podcasts, even recent ones.
Have you watched it again recently?
I have. Okay. And I've been really diving deep into quantum theory, quantum physics, and black holes.
Right.
Just
because that sounds like a fun thing to do on the side.
My son and I are really trying to figure out the event horizon. What does it look like? What does it look like after you cross it? Into a black hole, things like that. And then the difference between a gargantuan black hole and just a regular black hole or a mild black hole. But anyway.
When you say these things, I don't even feel smart. I mean, I just feel like...
But I think there's a story that I want to talk about.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of the name Vladimir Komarov?
Negative.
Yeah.
Never heard of him.
He is the Russian astronaut, right? Mm-hmm. Cosmonaut to them. Mm-hmm. First guy into space.
Okay. Really?
And his story is fascinating. The story itself is fascinating. It ties into faith and things like that. But it's a cool story because we're not in the space race anymore, right? We won. It's nothing about that. But it's a really interesting story, and I want to get your take on it.
All right, bring it.
But we got to look at concise theology first, right?
Oh, okay.
That's where we start.
Oh, a nice little teaser.
Yeah.
Nice.
Concise theology first.
Yes.
This is topic 37.
I like this week's topic.
It's up your wheelhouse.
It
right?
is, yes.
I know your title says music leader or music director. I see you as a worship leader, right?
Sure.
And so
you've told me that before and helped me, you as the shepherd of our congregation have helped me frame that role and that lens for myself.
If you say music leader, you're like, I'm just the guy that leads the music.
And I can't read music or do music very well.
But if you say worship leader, you have
yes.
direction over our worship, right? Where we headed as a church, things like that. So it's important.
It is. And so I like this week's thread. And if you've had a chance to read it as you have followed along with us, you'll know it's, as Ryan said, topic number 37. The scripture that Packer uses to kind of frame our thinking comes from Psalm 95, verses 6 and 7, and it says, "Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand."
Nice. Psalms. I love the Psalms.
Me too.
So let's just jump into it, right? There's some things I circled. I'm not going to read everything. I do want to read the first sentence, and I want to jump in on some things. I want to get your take on some of the words, right?
Yeah.
So the first sentence, worship in the Bible is the due response of rational creatures to the self-revelation of their creator.
Yep.
Worship is a response of our theology, right? What we know about God, we turn into doxology, right? Mm-hmm. So the more I learn about God, the more I should worship.
That's right. And the piece that stuck out to me there was the rational creature, comment, and it's kind of a throwaway thing, but if you think about all the creatures in God's creation, those that are irrational or not thinking, not made in God's image, don't necessarily worship Him, and so we are His creation that are made in His image, and as we recognize and understand how God, our Creator, reveals Himself to us, then it is the rational response, the due response to worship Him.
Yeah.
In an understanding of what and who and how we are.
Yeah, this isn't in the book. What do you say to the guy? And I'm gonna say guy because it's typically who we're talking about. The guy that comes to church, says I'm a believer, never opens his mouth in praise or worship. When we're singing or leading, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What do you say to that guy?
As the person who stands up in front and does lead singing and those kinds of things, I've got 100 people looking back at me as we sing, and I've gone through phases over the years where I get kind of downhearted at the lack of emotion that comes in what I can see in the worship.
Yeah.
And I've had to, convince myself or just kind of talk myself through the idea that I don't know what's happening in someone's heart. And so I'm very much an emotion on my sleeve kind of guy. It's just how I operate in life. No poker face or whatever, if you will. It's just kind of how I operate. And so it's not natural to me to keep things on the inside. And I think that's probably atypical. Most people, hide things, keep things in, and their natural response is more guarded. So it's hard for me then to judge somebody who doesn't participate corporately in a worship service the way that I want them to. That's it's hard for me to judge that.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I can reflect on what's going on inside somebody's heart. I want to believe that just because they don't necessarily corporately worship the way I do, with the emotion on the outside and the bigness of it and the really the emotional connection, doesn't mean that it's not happening inside their heart.
Yeah.
I know that's probably
it's a good neutral.
I don't mean
answer,
to be neutral.
right?
I want to believe that that's happening.
As a pastor, I'm going to say, if you're a guy and you're in our church and you're listening, sing.
Yeah.
Right? Because when you do it, your family's going to do it. If you don't do it, your family's not going to do it, period. I think, moms sing pretty well, right, in families. Grandmas, you can hear those voices a lot more than guys. Mm-hmm. We typically sing lower or quieter.
Mm-hmm.
But if your son or daughter sees you sing, they're going to be more apt to sing, I think.
It's a good point.
Just as a dude, right?
Yep.
As men.
Yeah, there's a...
and I'm not saying yours was totally neutral. Yours was because you don't see what's going... Like, if somebody walks down the aisle and says, I want to follow Jesus, I don't know what's going on in their heart.
Right.
I just hear what they're coming out of their mouth, right?
Right.
Same thing with worship. You could be worshiping on the inside. However, you're setting an example. I'll say that.
I agree with that. And there is a machismo, vibe. I don't know that it's necessarily more outspoken in our church than in others, but it's typically a dude thing to, I don't know where over history it became uncool to sing. Yeah. But it kind of has. If you think back before like TV and, like caroling was an entertainment thing.
Yeah.
People did that. They got together and they went around and sang.
Hey, let's go sing in front of somebody's house.
I know it seems strange to us today, but it wasn't back in the day. And that kind of just emotional response, or even just that kind of that idea of it being something that is normal, is what we do, has gone away. Yeah. And there is a sense of, man, it ain't cool to sing, which I don't necessarily like.
Well, it may not be that particular answer. However, I think it's something like that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a guy. I don't have to do that.
I disagree. I don't like it.
Yeah.
Because I don't function that way.
Yeah, they may not be the number one, but I think there's somewhere in there like, I need to be reserved. I'm a guy in the church, right? That kind of thing.
It brings me.
What about expectation?
What do you mean?
I think I've go a couple times. I don't preach directly to the men in our church, right? On a regular basis. I do on occasion. Yeah. I'll say something like, hey, if you're a man, you're a husband, things like that. Do we set the tone for men?
No.
That's
a great point. And I'll say this. We are
we as in our church, but
our church,
churches in general.
Well, specifically ours. We're of the Baptist faith, and that when it comes to the singing, are accompanied by instruments.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a denomination that did not use instruments, and in that it was very focused on the voice being the only way of singing, and so there were specific songs in like an echoey kind of way, like men had the lead, women echoed, or vice versa, and it was kind of an accountability piece almost, where if the guys aren't singing, nothing's going to happen.
Yeah,
that's not an option in our church. Like, we've got an organ and we've got a piano and we've got on days when the band plays, drums and guitars and all kinds of stuff going, and it's much easier to just kind of take a back seat and not really focus as much on how loud or even participatory you are, just because of the way we've got it set up. And I think that's the point you were just making.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about with, especially worship men, right? Just in general, just the church as a whole. Back to J.I. Packer.
Well, I want to take it back there. I was going to make the next point. Did you have were you going to transition into it?
Well, I was going to look at the words that he's using here next.
So the next part he talks about, he picks out 4 kind of key components.
Yeah, I'll say 6.
Okay. Well,
just because I circled 2 more.
Yep. You circled offering and learning?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yes. Not offering, though. But yes, that's probably one of them. That would be 7. Sorry. Go ahead. Start with the first 4.
The next sentence he has is, it's an honoring and glorifying by gratefully offering back.
Yeah. Offering is, I skipped that one. I didn't start with that one. That's a good one.
The 4 big ones that are in the middle that and there are a couple of other tangential ones, but they are praise, thanksgiving, desire, and trust.
Yeah, those are big.
Yeah.
Right? As part of worship. I also circled the next page. David danced, right? There was dancing, and then there's learning.
Yeah, learning.
Right? The learning, which threw me off a little bit, but it's learning from God is worship. So the more, I guess, you get into the instruction of the word, the more you begin to understand the word.
As I was growing up, I thought, and maybe not even growing up, I mean, this is kind of a prevailing thing for me. Even now I struggle with it. Not struggle, but when I think of worship, in my mind, the praise piece comes first. And really, sometimes it's all I think about. Like, and it's because I lead singing, and it's because it's music, and it's so that praise piece of worship is where I err, or where I gravitate to. Yeah. So, like, that's what worship is to me. So I was grateful to Packer for unpacking these other ideas that are just as important scripturally to what worship is. And so when you think of those, and we kind of zipped through them, but though the other ones, Ryan, the thanksgiving, the desire, the trust, the learning, those things, and I'm hearkening back to the question you asked me at the beginning. If I don't sing, can I still, be involved in worship? And I think if you're thinking through the lens of being thankful, or of just desiring relationship with God, of trusting in a relationship with God, of learning, well, you've hit 4 of the 5 without the praise, and so I'm not saying it's impossible.
I see it.
You see what I'm saying? I'm just saying that praise is a piece of worship, not the only part of worship.
But I want to go back to the beginning of that sentence. I want to push on that one.
Okay.
It is an honoring and glorifying God by gratefully offering back.
Yeah.
Right? I think all of it, whether it's praise, thanking, desiring, trusting, celebrating, or learning, I think it's a giving back to, right? Mm-hmm. Do you have to be only singing? No. I think that's a big piece of it, though. I think the more that the question I would ask myself is, am I learning, right? Mm-hmm. Am I thankful for the things that God has done? Am I trusting? Am I desiring? And if so, why isn't my outward worship expression there, right? Yeah. I mean, maybe, but I think you're closer than I am in understanding of the outward expression, right? It may be inward, right?
Yeah.
And it may be learning, right? It may be trusting and things like that more than anything. There may be days that the loudest singer in our church comes to church and doesn't sing because she's got something going on. He or she, right? I'm not going to say who, but maybe there's something inwardly. They're more focused inwardly that week than they were outwardly, right?
I think it's just as impactful to be in a place, and I think this is represented in Scripture. I think when David wrote the Psalms, there are several times where he was celebrating, dancing, but conversely, I think there is a just as powerful awestruck wonder, where you almost can't sing out, where you're just in God's presence, and it's a calm reflection.
Sometimes
that can be worship,
and some of the Psalms are anger, right?
True.
And worried and anxiety and all that stuff. So those
are reflective of that trust piece component of worship, where I'm just trusting that I'm in your presence and I acknowledge who you are, and I'm scared right now, and I can worship you as my Father.
Yeah. He says the basis of worship is the covenant relationship whereby God has bound himself to those whom he has saved and claimed.
Yeah.
So it's a two-way thing, right? If I'm in a relationship with God, he speaks of the covenant. He's going to talk about the old covenant and the new covenant here, both, but it's whereby God has bound himself to those whom he saved and claimed. Not that he's saved us and then walked away, right? He's bound himself to sinful humanity, right? Whom he saved and claimed. It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
I've never thought about worship that way, or even that there's this balance, there's this relationship as I worship, right? To a holy God. I don't know if I want to go anywhere, deeper than that, but
I think that there are a lot of components that I think you could get into worship really deeply.
Yeah.
And I think this is a perfect example of concise, because it's called concise theology. I think he hits on some big ideas. He doesn't dive into what does it mean to trust through worship. He doesn't dive into what does it mean to desire through worship. He even says things that I want to dive in more, that would require me to study more, that aren't in here. And I'll give you an example. He says this: acceptable worship requires clean hands and a pure heart. That comes from Psalm 24. But it also requires a willingness to express one's devotion in the works of service as well as in words of adoration. He doesn't even talk about how works of service can be a worship.
Yeah, he just mentions it.
He just mentions it and moves
topic.
on to the next topic, which I think is that's the purpose of this book. It's concise and it just goes through it. But we haven't even talked about that. You hear about other churches that take a worship service and go do acts of service. Yeah. And does that qualify? Am I still worshiping? How does that work? And
I think it's coming in the near future
for our church.
Yeah,
but just saying
that's good.
Yeah.
He looks at the Old Testament covenant, and I drew some circles on this one before we get to the new covenant. Right? I like the new covenant because I'm under the new covenant. But
right, that's mine.
He says the Mosaic legislation. You see that paragraph? Mm-hmm. He said God gave his covenant people a full pattern of their worship. So he gave them how to worship, and it points forward to Christ. But at the bottom of the page 115, he says, here's the pattern, right?
Yep.
Here's the pattern that we see in the Old Testament with the Old Covenant, right?
Yep.
So the people of God in the Old Testament, number one, the Sabbath. Each seventh day, following 6 days for labor, a holy day of rest to be observed as a memorial of creation. He's going to get into that at the end. Mm-hmm. We talked about how in the New Covenant it's backwards, right?
Right.
And so instead of 6 days and then a rest, it's rest, worship, and then the rest of the week. Yeah. So
the second piece he pulls out from the Mosaic Law is something that was trumped in the New Covenant, but the second piece was the annual feasts. And in the original Jewish covenant, God laid out for them, I want you to have these 3 feasts or holidays throughout your worship in a year's time. They were Passover, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Booths. Just 3 monster feasts that the Jews needed to celebrate in order to worship God the way he expected.
Have you ever looked at their calendar, the Jewish calendar, and all the stuff they have to do? There's some, like, it'd be like pretty cool to observe some of those things.
Yeah, it would.
But under the old covenant, they had to observe those to remain holy
Right.
in relationship with God, right?
Right.
So that's the difference in what we would be doing today. Number 3, the Day of Atonement, held on the 10th day of the 7th month, when the high priest took the blood into the central shrine of the sanctuary to atone for Israel's sins. This is the day I would not want to be the high priest,
Wow.
right?
Yeah. This is where they have to tie the rope around
Yeah,
it.
he had to be clean, but then he also had to be without sin. And imagine how many priests they'd have to go through before they stepped into the Holy of Holies. Man, I would be trembling as a high priest on that day. But for that day, he would take the sacrifice. He would go into the Holy of Holies and repent for the sins of the people, like
of the nation,
all of the
right,
people. Yeah.
yeah.
And so it's a heavy day.
And not just that, but the fourth component that God required in the original worship service was while on the Day of Atonement, there was the one day that the priest took the blood into the Holy of Holies, but there was the regular sacrificial system that required the daily and monthly, all the burnt offerings and everything that comes from the book of Numbers and Leviticus, all the requirements that were required for the people to become clean and for the people to be right with God again. And that's the major difference of the Mosaic law and the New Covenant, which was basically in the sense of you're going to continue to screw up, you're going to continue to sin, so you need to sacrifice in order to fix that and kind of just cover up your sin, which is still there, but we're just going to cover it up with the blood of this animal. And this perpetual fixing, not even fixing, it was just it was a perpetual cycle of covering up the sin that the people had. And it was not a broken system. It was God's law, and it was right, and it was good. But the people didn't use it in the way that should have revealed to them the need for a savior, the need to come to God. It was always just a matter of, well, I messed up again, so I'm just going to cover this up with some this perpetual. It wasn't a drawing near.
Yeah.
It was just a fix it kind of situation. And so that fourth component of the sacrificial system was just it was transactional.
Yeah.
It was very transactional.
It was meant to point to a need of something else, right?
Right.
We kind of mentioned it. We can kind of float right in, unless you want to add anything else to this.
Nothing
chapter.
other than the original system that God created for worship was ritualistic. Yeah. It was very detailed, was very structured. It was exactly what he wanted, when he wanted, for the sake of just the ritual of it.
Yeah, I think it's that set apartness, right? You're a nation, you're mine. You're supposed to look different, be different than those around you. I think that was a big part of that, or the law, but the rituals, the high priest, the priests in general, the high priest and the priests had a whole lot of responsibility in leading the people, not only to follow the law, but also the sacrificial part of it. Like, the amount of blood spilt on behalf of the people is enormous, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the daily reminder of a slain animal from my pen or from my barn was like, I had to give something up in order to be right with God. Like, it was a big weight on their shoulders to say, where's the spotless lamb that we have? Where's the bird that we have? Where's the goat? Whatever it was.
Right.
I had to give that up in order to be forgiven by God. It's a big deal.
And I don't want to have given the impression that it was just, rote, ritual, doing the same old thing. Although I think it turned into that. The original design, what you're describing here, I think God intended for it to be an awe-inspiring, joyful thing. That was the model. That it was intended to remind his people of who he was through this humbling, this self-humbling, this awareness of sin, this awareness of the fall and the break between them. I think that that was the original design, I don't think our Creator would have been like, well, I want you to do these things just because I want it to be boring and ritualistic. It wasn't that intention.
Yeah, no, I think all of it in the Old Testament pointed to something more, a need for something greater, a greater prophet, a greater priest, a greater king, a greater sacrificial something, lamb, right? And I think it all points to Christ. It's perfect for the Advent season, I think.
I do too.
So
then he wraps up the chapter with what you described. He compounds or combines all of these things into what the new covenant describes to be worship. And so, I think last time we met on the podcast, we talked about the idea of traditional Judaism or, those kinds of things. Why do we not have the long sideburns and those kinds of things? And Packer does a good job of saying, these four elements that we just described that existed in the Mosaic covenant, have been replaced because of the new covenant in these ways. And so, the things that he described with regard to say, for example, the keeping the Sabbath, right? Well, in Acts chapter 20, the new covenant describes worshiping on the first day of the week rather than that 6 days and then rest on the seventh day. It's the first day and then there's 6 after. And so, there are components that existed in the original that were trumped or replaced with the new covenant, and they still exist, but we don't have to follow the old covenant because we don't live under the old covenant.
Yeah, I think, Jesus' words, I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. It's fulfilled in Christ. I thought I was going to go with this.
Well, I mean, the biggest component of them all, the former sacrificial system was, maybe the biggest component of worship. It was, you are a sinner. This sacrifice you commit will, cover the sin, and the sin still exists, but it's going to be covered
temporary.
up. Temporary. That's exactly right. And so what the new covenant has done is Christ was the sacrifice once and for all. It's exactly what you preached on this morning. We're the only religion in the world that says the work has already been done.
Yeah.
Every other religion says, and in fact, the original Mosaic covenant said, work hard enough to be okay with God.
Yeah. Follow the covenant, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then what Christ did satisfied what God requires, God provides.
The word I was looking for, he didn't replace is a good word. What about the word refined?
No. Yeah.
Jesus refined the law for us in the new covenant, right? It's because even in Matthew 5 through 7, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, "You've heard it said by the priest," right? They're trying to interpret the law, but I tell you this, right? Mm-hmm. You've heard it said this, but here's what it really means. He's refining the understanding of the law for us. But it's
much of it was, the letter of the law, and that's what the Pharisees were doing, and all the scribes, and they were, they were trying to live up to this law, and they couldn't. In a very specific and a keeping score kind of way. And when Christ came and said, "No, it's not. It's about the heart.
Yeah,
the heart of the matter is the matter of the heart." Yeah. It just flipped everything on its head, and it's what we experience today. The chance we have at redemption.
But that's also why. I mean, one of the questions that I heard this week was, why was Jesus crucified? There was a big debate on one of the social medias that I was following, and it came down to it. Somebody actually put the truth on it. It was like, the religious leaders of his day wanted him gone because of what he said was so opposite of what they were teaching. The Pharisees, the people that were supposed to be leading God's people, were the ones who put Jesus on the cross. It wasn't Rome, right?
Yeah.
The Jewish leaders used Rome as, I guess, a de facto tool to get Jesus crucified, but it was his own people that he came to save. From the Old Testament, right? For the Jewish line from the Old Testament, they're the ones that put him on the cross. De facto, us, right? We put him on the cross as humanity, but because he did not adhere to their understanding of the law, that's what put him on the cross, according to Jewish, tradition, that kind of thing. He said, "I'm God. The Father and I are one," right?
Right.
How dare you? There's only one God, right? There was a lot to it, but I don't know why I went down this road. But
no, it's okay.
Even the Jewish people that we pray for Israel, right? We do that a lot in our church. The Bible tells us to do that. but we're not praying for Israel to be safe because among the nations trying to bomb them or anything. We're praying for the nation of Israel to be saved, right, in Christ. He came to his own people. They didn't want him. They didn't know him, right? They didn't even know what was going on. There was a few, like the one on the cross, right? The thief next to him. Whether he was Jewish or not, we don't know, but we know that he was there in Jesus' day. Jesus came to save that which was lost, and some of the lost didn't want to see him as Savior, right?
As a thought experiment, I've talked with a lot of people. A buddy of mine, I don't even remember who though, so don't ask, said to me one time, it would have just been so much easier if I could have known Jesus.
Oof.
And I said, I'm going to challenge your thinking on that, buddy, because, had we met the guy and been there, I want with all of my heart to believe that I would have believed him.
Yeah.
But that was the minority.
Yeah.
The minority. I mean, I know that there were a lot of people who followed and believed, and thousands came, and maybe I would have been one of those. But I don't know, and I want to believe that I would have been on board with it. But today, when I'm challenged with tradition, and I don't mean to say religiously speaking, I just mean in terms of how I live my life. When somebody questions things that are just, well, this is how we do stuff.
Yeah.
I typically reject that. I typically am like, whoa, hold on there, buddy. We do it this way. And so if that's my natural inclination, and had this guy shown up and been like, I'm God's son, I wonder if I'd have been like, okay, sure you are, bud. And, been kind of a non-believer maybe. And that terrifies me.
Think about the thousands that followed him. Jesus even addressed them and said, you're only here for the miracle.
Yeah.
If I saw somebody raise somebody from the dead or heal a blind man or right, all that stuff, I'd like, I want to follow that guy. But as soon as that guy says, hey, now go and sell all your possessions and follow me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I know.
Think about the disciples, right? Leave everything and follow me. Like the work that you're doing right now, you're fishing for your money. Yeah, you're going to leave that behind. You're going to follow me.
It's scary.
I mean,
it's easy.
Yeah.
We live in the Bible Belt, and it's easy to be, okay, I'm going to go on Sundays and I'm going to worship.
Just for my heart,
yeah,
I wasn't a disciple. Jesus didn't pick me.
Right.
He saved me, yes, but he for whatever reason, I wasn't the guy back in history that was going to be one of his disciples. Right? Yeah. He knew he was picking on purpose. Even
Plan
Judas,
A.
Right? Yeah. And so that's a good the litmus test, right, if you will. Not many people follow Jesus, especially at the crucifixion or after the crucifixion, right? A lot of them scattered. And even on the hill, when he came back and said, hey, I want you to stay in Jerusalem, you're going to make disciples of many nations. It says at the beginning of that, before it says, all authority is given to me, they came, some worshiped, and some did what? Doubted. Right? They were still doubting, even though he rose from the dead.
Yeah. All those thousands who were there for the miracle.
Yeah.
Are the same ones who, were like, okay, let's crucify him. Crucify him. That sounds good.
We'll take the thief, the Barabbas. Right. Give us that guy. Yeah. And we don't want the guy that would do all the miracles, right?
Yeah.
Yes, it's part, if you read Acts, God is the one who put Jesus on the cross. But if you read the Gospels, the Jewish leadership put Jesus on the cross. The Jews, his own people, right? It was all part of God's plan, right? Plan A. The sovereignty of God baffles me. It will always baffle me. Why did he have to go and die, right? Why did God himself come in the flesh to die on a cross? Because you and I can't do it. That's right. It gets back to that one simple point. You and I can't do it. You got something else?
I do. There is one last thing in this worship chapter that I didn't intend to come back to, but I think it's cool. It says, worship. Since God is holy and we humans are faulty, it must ever be so in this world that the fact that we need to worship him.
Yep.
As worship will be central in the life of heaven.
Yeah, that's all we'll be doing.
Yeah, so in Revelation, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 7, chapter 11, chapter 15, chapter 19, there is nothing but descriptions of what it will be like in heaven. And all of those, verses 8 through 11, 9 through 14, 9 through 17, 15, on and on and on and on, describe how worship will be central when we get to heaven.
Not only that, his glory will be the light that we use to read the lyrics to the songs we're singing. You know what I mean? It's going to be amazing.
It is going to be amazing. And that, idea of hopefulness, that idea of pointing towards something better, makes what we're doing here seem. And by here I mean just going through this life.
Yeah.
The things that get me down.
The
and get
Pilgrim's Progress.
Yeah, it makes this all seem temporary and trivial, and it is. And so while we go through these things and make much ado about nothing, we've got to get back to this idea that my whole purpose here is to bring glory to my God.
Yeah, I think if we look at it from that angle, how much more simple would our life be, right?
True.
We get caught up in all the other stuff, right? And we're all caught up in the consumerism right now. Hey, Christmas, you got so many days of shopping left, all that stuff. We get caught up in it, right? It just happens. But if we look at it from all the things that we're doing here, temporary.
Yeah.
The things that we're doing for our soul, right? The things of the kingdom of God, serving the church, right? Serving God in all that we do, that's eternal. Those things are eternal. And I think we've got them backwards at times in life, right?
I do too. As I closed worship this morning in a prayer, I was super thoughtful about a friend of mine who recently passed away. And, this time of year, those who are no longer with us come to mind and bring sadness to a lot of people. I'm always thoughtful about Dad. Yeah. My dad, I lost 2 years ago. When it comes to the holidays, I miss him. But when I think about eternity and how, 2 years without my dad right now, or this one day without my friend who died, that's hard and it stinks and I miss them. But when you think about how much of a breath that our life is, and how eternally it puts so much into perspective. Eternally we get to be, in God's presence and with him and with the believers and the saints forever.
Yeah.
It just makes missing somebody now the better perspective. It just puts it all into perspective for me.
Yeah, I want to go back to time and space because we always do. I don't know the name of this theology or this theological understanding of death. A question's always asked around the time of this, just holidays and things like that. Where are my loved ones? But what about the Old Testament people when they died? Where are they right now? Are they in heaven? Are they experiencing heaven? Or the people that died in my life right now, are they experiencing heaven? And what is the time? Is there a time difference, right? And all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. My favorite answer is, and I don't know where this comes from other than just my understanding of time and space. God is outside of time. Therefore, heaven, I believe, would be outside of time. I believe, right?
Yep.
Whether or not heaven's up in the sky, like we think, like as we grow up, like, oh, heaven's up there around our atmosphere. We know space is out there and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Wherever heaven is, there is no time, right? It's eternity, right? We can't fathom it here on earth because we have clocks.
Right.
We have watches, things like that. We grow old. I believe that the Old Testament believers, right, those who place their faith in God, a future Christ to come, right, when they die, it's the same moment that if I were to die today, I think it's the same exact moment. And moment's even a time word too, right? So it's one of those things that I've always thought about. What does time look like for folks right now who have passed? Sure. And there's really no way to really understand it fully.
I don't know what if I know that I'm not smart enough to understand this, but I somewhere along the way I picked this up. Have you ever heard of string theory?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what string theory is, but somebody told me that this is
Yeah.
I picked this thinking up.
Yeah.
We think of life as a string.
Yeah.
If you hold one end out with your left hand and you tighten that string out with your right hand, and it's a straight line that goes from your left hand to your right hand, beginning to the end, there is, a progression.
Yeah.
It moves.
A beginning and an end.
If you took that string and wadded it up and put it down into the palm of one hand, and all those different points touch different points, and it's just all bound together, that's what I think you're describing. Is that, there isn't...
So like the multiverse.
Maybe. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm not smart enough to understand this.
Yeah.
I just picked up this thinking once that it was like, okay, that's how I think of time, and I understand there's a beginning and there's an end and a straight line, but God doesn't have that. And I don't know if that's what the string theory actually is. I'm just saying that that comes to mind when maybe they died in the Old Testament is the exact same moment I die.
Yeah.
And it's the exact same moment Christ comes back. All of those things.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
I looked up string theory with Braden when we were looking at quantum physics, and because it came up, it's a string. You're crossing the streams right now with multiverse and string. I think people have to go and comment. Nobody's ever left a comment, by the way.
We should just start saying rando things.
Leave a comment about this if you know anything about string theory. String theory, from what we saw, was it's a string that's stretched, right, beginning and end, but when it's pulled, it vibrates, and so there's these vibrations in the string. In string theory, is vibration. So, and these vibrations are frequencies, different frequencies of the same timeline or the same string, right?
Yeah.
And so all these vibrations, as they go, could cross and meld and things like that, similar to what you're talking about.
Okay.
But the string itself doesn't wad up, right? It's still one point to the other point. Again, I don't know anything about string theory.
Maybe the guy who explained that to me was like, think of it like a string. And I was like, oh, that must be what string theory is.
From what I remember, I think it's more like vibrations of the string, right? Frequencies. But again, I don't know much about. If you know about string theory, if you're a science teacher right now and you're listening to this podcast, please leave a comment.
Ooh.
Right?
Yeah. It'd be great.
If you leave a comment, we'll bring back a free giveaway of Concise Theology again, right? Because we haven't done it in a while.
We haven't.
Jumping into the sermon, we have to, right? So we got to go from string theory to rando sermon.
Not a rando sermon.
Advent week 2.
We are Advent, yes.
I think this week, so I'm not a good topical preacher, right? I know that about myself. For me, it's easier for me to walk through a passage or walk through a book of the Bible and get the understanding of what the context is, what the theme is, and like that. Mm-hmm. Going through themes is harder for me, right? Because it seems to me more study than sermon in the sense. But today was Advent week 2, and the theme was peace.
Is this, for us, it's week 2, or is this actually the second week of Advent?
So there's 2 ways to look at it.
Okay.
For some churches, this is Advent week 1.
Right.
Because December 1st is closer to Thanksgiving than November the 24th.
Okay.
And you start on the closest Sunday to Thanksgiving.
Okay.
That's Advent 1.
Got it.
I started Advent 1 on the 24th because the 5th week, if you start on the 24th, is the Christ candle. The Christ candle typically is Christmas Eve. However, our 2020 or December 22 is right before Christmas, right? That's a Sunday. I'm going to use that as the Christ candle.
Got it.
And so there's 4 weeks before that. So I just had to work backwards.
I just didn't know.
Yeah.
I know that I thought I read somewhere that this was the week 1 in some other.
You can Google it, and there'll be a million different answers.
Okay, this
right?
one. Okay, yeah.
There are 4 candles, right? And there are 5 candles technically if you add the Christ candle, because that's the 5th candle. That's the big white candle in the middle. But 3 purple and 1 pink. Purple for hope last week. Purple for peace this week. Pink for joy next week. And then back to purple for love on the 4th week.
Okay.
Yeah. Theme.
What does Advent mean?
Advent is Adventus. It's Latin, right? It's an anticipation of what has happened and what's to come. It's an in-between time. For people in the Old Testament, they were awaiting the first Advent or the first coming of the Messiah, and we are in the middle of the first coming and the second coming. And so we are anticipating Christ's return, right? So we're in the middle. We're in the in-between.
Got it. And where does Adventus come from?
It's Latin.
Oh, yes, it is.
I said that, yeah. Adventus means the coming or coming of. And then it's...
I just know how much you love Latin. I just want to give you the chance
anticipation of what's to come. So, again, back to themes. I'm not really good at themes or topical type sermons. However, I used Isaiah 9, 1 through 7, which... Do you remember the background I started with on this chapter?
I don't know what you mean.
So the background of this text, the people of God were in a weird place, right? So if you go to Isaiah, there's a lot of good passages in Isaiah that we use for Christmas, that we use for prophecy, things like that. But
yeah, so the previous chapter, you said Isaiah 8 describes the people of God walking in darkness, physically, spiritually, and now here in chapter 9, it's this idea of a promise.
Yeah, there's the message is really for the northern kingdoms, right? It's Israel as a whole, but The Assyrian Empire just came in through the northern kingdoms or the northern tribes of Israel. If you go into a later chapters, or chapter 13, I believe, of Isaiah, is the Babylonian exile. And there's all kinds of stuff happening in the book of Isaiah from the prophet. But in the middle of all these chaotic things, these judgment, these discipline type moments, God says, hey, but guess what? There's something really awesome coming. It's going to be amazing. And all the prophets really point to this coming of a renewal, a coming of promise. Something's going to happen soon. But imagine if you're the Israelites, Assyrian army's coming in, the Babylonians are getting ready to come exile you. You don't really know that, but you're anticipating all the nations around you warring, and you hear from a prophet like, hey, there's a baby coming.
Yeah.
Right? I was hoping there was going to be more of a reaction when I brought that up, but it was just like,
neat.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
We get it.
I think that's probably how the people felt.
Yeah.
Don't you think when Isaiah was like, no, seriously, there'll be a baby. Everybody was just kind of like,
a son is going to be born.
Yeah, they're just kind of looking at him like, huh. You're saying a baby will be born. Okay.
And so I went all the way back. It's like, why is this important, right? And then maybe some of them would have remembered the old promises handed down from generation to generation. Like, oh, this goes back to the garden.
Yeah.
Right? And it goes all the way back to the garden. Genesis 3:15. Do you have that pulled up or close to you?
I have Genesis 3:15 pulled up. Yes. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel.
Yeah, so this offspring, right? This baby between Adam and Eve's baby, Adam, or Eve, really the mother of humanity, right? And Satan, the serpent, right? This baby, this offspring is coming to crush the serpent. So if you understand from the context of starting in Genesis and you're walking through the entire Old Testament, Cain and Abel's right next. Is Cain or Abel going to be this offspring that crushes the serpent?
Right.
Well, it starts off really bad. Cain kills Abel, right? And then you get to Genesis chapter 6, it gets worse. And then you have Noah in the ark, and everybody's wiped out. And you're like, okay, Noah's got to be the guy that's going to fix everything. And then right after that, it goes downhill again. And it's like, holy cow, like when is this baby coming, right? And every address of a new person in the Old Testament, there's this anticipation of the people of God. Is this the offspring? Is this the one coming, right? Hopefully that came out. I don't know if it came out well or not.
No, I thought it was. I thought you did good.
I tried to go through. I missed Joseph, right? So I said Abram. I missed the Joseph. I mentioned Moses, and then the kings, the prophets, and priests, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But why is there a baby
Isaac
coming?
and Jacob and Abraham and all the and Joseph? And,
because of sin, there has to be someone that comes to crush it, right?
Right.
To fix the problem, and none of these guys fix the problem, right? None of them that are mentioned. There's moments of like, oh, maybe this is it. You know what I found out during this study? You've heard the story of David and Goliath. If you're listening, everybody's heard of David and Goliath, right? David kills Goliath, the big giant, the underdog David. Yeah. The people of God saw David as maybe this guy coming. And why is that important? When Goliath comes out in the field, he's wearing armor, bronze armor. If you read 1 Samuel 17, the description of it, specifically in NIV, it says that the Goliath is wearing this bronze armor of scales.
Uh-huh.
Why is that important? Why is that even in the Bible? They mention it's scales. The serpent has scales.
Really?
David is the forerunner to Christ. He's the one who gets on the throne. From David's throne comes Jesus. But there's this mention, like all throughout the Old Testament, you'll see these little glimpses of, here's the story, the promise from Genesis chapter 3, that there's going to be this serpent crusher that finally crushed the serpent. Like all throughout this, Moses has a staff with a serpent wrapped around it. That's where the Red Cross gets their thing, by the way.
Yeah.
But he raises this staff. If you look up to this staff with a serpent on it, that's where you'll be forgiven and you'll be healed. And all that, like all these little glimpses of the serpent and this coming promise of an offspring, it's all throughout the Old Testament, right? The more you dig deep into it. It's amazing. I never heard that before until I started studying it. And I was like, oh man, David was like, imagine seeing this little shepherd boy. Like, is this the offspring? Like, is this the guy?
Yeah, they've been talking about.
And then David goes to the throne. And it's like, hey, that's somebody's wife. I'm going to have her for my woman.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, he's not the guy.
Yeah.
Right. And then Solomon, like all these things. And it's like, who's the one? And then now you're Israel and you're in the midst of exile and all these nations are coming at you, and there's this prophecy like it's right around the corner, right? But then after that, there's this intertestamental period between the Old Testament and New Testament, 400 years. God does not speak. And you're like, where is this? And so Christmas is the darkest months of the year, right? The darkest days of the year. And this great light has shone. Here's the Son. He's going to be given to you, right? That's kind of the background. I didn't say any of that in the sermon, which I probably could have.
But once again, Easter egg.
But
that's why listening to the podcast for our community is so much cooler.
It's like Patreon, but it's not. You don't have to pay for this. So the first point, the identity of the Prince of Peace. So who is this Prince of Peace based on Isaiah 9, 6 through 7? Do you want to mention anything about it?
No, I think you've nailed everything that you got to. This idea that humanity was waiting and searching and hoping, and that the Old Testament is just that roller coaster of, is it now? How can they have forgotten again? Why did they? Oh, and they're going to come back, and then they forget. And this,
you can imagine like generations. I mean, if NASA could forget how to go to the moon, imagine the generation of people like, we heard this promise and they didn't pass this piece. They were more worried about everything else.
Sure.
But this prophecy, like, well, we got to be waiting for this thing, right?
Yeah. Hundreds of years.
Yeah, he's given titles.
Yep.
Wonderful Counselor.
Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Yeah.
And I tried to weave the gospel into these titles. I don't know if it came out well or not. But each of these titles that is given to this Prince of Peace, this is his identity. It's a picture of the gospel in a sense. He's fully God and fully man, right? And so he is a son that's born human, but he's also given divine, right? He's not just born like we are, but he's also given to us by God. That's his divine nature part of it. He came to save sinners, guide us in the truth. That's the Wonderful Counselor. Care for us eternally, mighty God. Everlasting Father. He brings us into peace with God. He's the Prince of Peace through his sacrifice and reign. And
all four of those titles are found in that Isaiah 9 text that you kind of used as your baseline.
Yeah, I don't. This just a peek behind the curtain. I don't feel comfortable with topical sermons. I feel like it's just like a devotional type, almost, if you will. Like today, I felt like it was more like academic, not so much academic, but more devotional type, not really sermon structure type, I guess.
Well, not your typical sermon, but there's, the idea, think back to what we talked about in the beginning of this, where, part of our worship service is learning from God. Yeah. So learning from God can look a lot of different ways. Yeah. It doesn't have to be where you're exegesically breaking down, Haggai, the book of Haggai. But instead, it could just be like, here, take this passage and let's just reflect on this.
Here's some snippets. I think we did, like last year was more topical too, right? Devotional. I think I told you, like, hey, you used a lot of music last year, right?
Yeah, no.
And it was shorter. It's definitely shorter today. I could feel it was a lot shorter. But the second one, the reign, what does his kingdom look like? And it mentions he's the increase of his government and peace will be no end, an unending peace, and he will be established on, or the kingdom will be established on justice and righteousness, right? Mm-hmm. Didn't really go into that, or in the zeal of the Lord will make this happen. Didn't really go real deep into those, other than to say that if God says it, right, it's going to happen, right? We've seen that in the Old Testament. God's promise, they come true, right? And so Jesus' kingdom is coming, right? He's going to bring this kingdom that will last forever. Think about the shepherds, like, hey, there's the Messiah, the one you've heard about in the stories of old. He's just been born, right? Go follow the star. This wise man, hey, there's the star. And like, go and worship, like all those things. And you're like, man, where's his kingdom coming? The Jewish people are like, he's going to be this warrior king,
right?
That's going to bring peace, right? Because he says he's the Prince of Peace, right? His kingdom will be everlasting and it'll be unending peace, justice and righteousness, right? He's going to come and do it. And he comes and dies on a cross, right?
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute,
he lost?
Did we get the wrong guy?
He's the loser, yeah. Right.
And so the kingdom that he's talking about, he started it when he came. It's coming again and will be forever, right? And so we're in the in between, right? Advent application. Hopefully, I drew some more out of that than it's going to sound bad. I think I put more emphasis on the application part than I did the sermon part. for me.
I don't see how you can take those two things away from each other.
Sure.
I don't know at all. I think
for me, time-wise, I use more time.
I understand that, but I mean to say that every sermon you preach, you try to put an application in there with it.
Try.
And well, sometimes
they're not
blatant,
good.
and sometimes it's just a reflection, kind of a how are you doing this? I don't but if I'm not. If I'm just hearing you say words and maybe gaining some knowledge, right? Oh, this happened in the book of Micah. I don't know how helpful that is in terms of, and I'm going to push it back to what Packard described worship as, learning from God.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know that learning from God through worship means that I need to have trivial knowledge of this means this and this was said here and this happened. I think the application piece is really helpful, and that's always going to have your human lens through it. I mean, you're just a guy talking to us about what your take on what these things are. I think there's some inspiration behind it, no doubt, and God is leading you to lead His people in a specific way. But I think that the application isn't something that you can say, well, this is separate from the sermon. I think it is what it is.
Yeah. And I was going to say, remember Haggai last week, consider your ways, right? Think about your heart, examine your heart. I was going to put that in there somewhere. I didn't put it in there at all, but hopefully, the application, there's three kinds of peace, right? Peace with God, peace within, and peace with others, right? Christ is the one who brings that to us, right? He brings it to the forefront. If my faith is in Christ, I'm going to be right with God. I'm going to have peace with God. I'll have peace about my salvation, right? And even peace with other believers or folks that God's brought into my life. That make sense?
It totally makes sense. So, when you thematically preach anything, maybe it's this week it was, peace, last week hope, whatever, you thematically, topically or thematically pick something. There's value in that because sometimes you and I talk a lot about how we read the Bible. And, there are ways that you can go through and be the check box or the box check kind of guy where you're like, I checked it off. I read what I was supposed to read. And then there are other times where you just, you're like, I'm going to read James today. And as you read through that, here's what I'm going to land the plane. Here's what I mean. Like, if I'm just picking up the book of James to read it, to see what the Bible has to say to me, having learned and heard my preacher thematically preach on something, trains my brain to thematically read the Bible. What am I trying to learn here? What is the overall picture? What am I trying to, to get from being in God's Word today? And so I don't think there's anything wrong with a thematic or a topical sermon because it's just a different way to be in communion with God.
Yeah.
And His Word.
Yeah. I like exposition, right?
I know you do.
The slow, methodical, what is the author saying? What's the content? Where's the people at, and they're receiving this letter or this prophecy or whatever it is. I could unpack that easier than like, here's the theme I want to talk about. Where do I find it in the Bible? Like, it's harder for me to do that because sometimes you could pull out 10 themes in one verse.
Yes.
Right. And that may not be the overall purpose of that verse, right?
Well, that's a great point. Yeah. And so, there's value. I think there's value.
But I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's value in doing theme or topical. I think there is an inherent danger in I can find a verse, pull it out of context, and make it say what I want it to say.
Yeah, that's my theme.
Right.
Don't mix your clothing with linens, right? Yeah, I got them. That's my go-to verse to get people.
Right.
That's wrong, right? We would all say that. But Advent. So we're talking about this Advent week 2. This is peace. Tonight we're going to have hanging of the green. Mm-hmm. People say hanging of the greens, and I'd say that's wrong because we're not hanging people. We're hanging the green, right? And that's the proper way to say it.
Got you.
I've said
what
greens.
What is the green?
The green is like the garland. You're supposed to be
greenery.
Yeah, the greenery. Yeah, you're supposed to be finishing up the touches, right, of the decorations and all that kind of stuff. Hanging of the green.
I have no idea what those words mean.
Yeah, it's just finishing up the decoration. For us, it's finishing up the decorations.
Yeah.
Some churches actually hang the green as a service, and their whole place is decorated after they're done.
Okay.
It's a cool thing. We have different themes throughout this. We ring the bells and we decorate the trees. We light candles at the end. I think that's most people. For us, that's a lot of the favorite. That's the moment everybody likes. Like, hey, we like to circle up in the dark and turn on some fire, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, we do. It is definitely for me the piece that I think about when I think about our hanging of the green service. We all stand up from our typical, comfortable pew that's in the shape of my behind, and we all circle around the auditorium, around our sanctuary, and kind of grab hands, and everybody circles up together, and then one person lights a candle. And they use their candle to light. Everybody's holding a little candle, and it's got a little piece of paper to protect you from the wax and all that stuff. But you use your candle to light the next person. And the room starts off dark. We turn the lights off, and one candle sparks another candle, another, until the room is fully lit by these, 75 people who have lit candles together. And then we sing Silent Night, and it just brings it all home in a way that is cool.
Yeah,
it's very emotional. Yeah.
It brings the perspective like, hey, we're in the middle of this season.
And we're in it together. There's a very much a unifying piece to one candle lit this entire room.
I like it.
Yeah.
My memory on my phone popped up, and I have the last 3 years on my phone of that picture of the circle, the dark circle, right? I get to sneak on the stage and take that picture.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Switching gears. We're going to land the plane on this one, I think. Okay. Have you ever heard of the Russian cosmonaut?
What? Oh, yes. I forgot. We're back to
Vladimir Komarov.
Vlad and I knew Vlad.
Yeah.
We were tight back in the day. He said some stuff about my mama, though, and we split ways.
He was on the Suez. We say Suez in the English.
Do we? I'm not sure I've ever said
Soyuz.
What are you talking about?
He was the first mission, right? From
that was the name of his ship?
Yeah.
You were talking about the canal. I was like, I don't even know what you're just saying.
Soyuz. Soyuz. Soyuz.
Got it.
Or in Russian.
Every time he and I talked about it, I'm pretty sure he said Soyuz.
Soyuz 1, he became a symbol of courage, but also a haunting reminder that human ambition can often get the best of us.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to kind of speak a story, but I want you to...
This is Vlad's life story?
Vlad. Not his life, but some of it, the important part.
Okay. The part that
the reason why people know him.
Yeah. Yeah, got it.
And I want you to jump in every once in a while. Just stop me.
Okay.
And so his mission, right? So first, he lived in the time of the Cold War, the space race, right? So back in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s, mid 60s, late 60s, right? There was this race between Russia and the United States to get to space, right? To get to the moon. Right. Even China, I think, chimed in maybe. Even recently, India kind of went to the moon in that weird video. If you ever watched that weird video,
I didn't.
It looks like a video game. It looks hokey. Like, it looks bad. And so if there's any kind of question about
there
India,
was a huge connection to nationalism and, pride.
Yeah, it was a big day, right? Yeah. We're going to beat Russia, right?
Yeah, that was a major
communism loses, right? That kind of thing. The red wave. We didn't want anything to do with Russia. But there was this man named Vladimir Komarov, right? The USSR, back in the day, was determined to maintain its lead in space exploration, often at the expense of safety. So Komarov, he was a skilled pilot, a cosmonaut, and he was the first one selected to fly the first Soyuz 1 in 1967. Now, the mission itself started with a whole bunch of problems. It had engineering flaws. There was political pressure, right, to get to space first and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But there was a whole lot from the Russian standpoint that was not good, inadequate preparation. Similar, you've seen the movie The Martian?
Yes.
And the dude stranded on Mars. If you haven't watched The Martian, you're way behind.
Man,
spoiler alert.
Catch up. And read the novel.
Yeah. That the first I guess the first ship they were going to try to resupply him, right? And they were like, hey, we got to get through the safety stuff. Let's not do that kind of all those safety checks.
Right.
And it launches and it blows up, right? That kind of similar to that kind of thing. That was what was going on.
But he was on that ship.
Oh, what?
They were saying we're not going to take the
yeah, so they're like, hey, we're not going to do a whole lot of safety stuff because we want to be first, right?
And you're going to be on the ship.
Yeah,
got it.
But here's the cool thing. I kind of put some of this together. Komarov reportedly knew the risks, but he chose to proceed the mission. Why would he do that? Why would he do that? Some say it was patriotism, right?
Okay.
Like, I want to be Russia. I want Russia to get to the other. Others say it was a sense of duty to his comrades. Hey, if I go first, maybe they'll be more safe after me.
Wow.
That kind of thing. So there's kind of ish. I think it was more the first one than the second one.
Yeah.
However, looking back, everybody gets a bigger prize looking back, right? The rumors kept going, though, that Komarov sacrificed himself, knowing the mission was doomed, but unwilling to let a less experienced cosmonaut take his place.
Okay.
I don't know that I would be that guy.
Yeah. I'm all right.
I mean, think about like Elon Musk right now. He wants to go to the Mars in like 2030, right? Whatever. I forgot what it was. It's soon. Will you want to be the first one?
No.
Yeah. I don't want to be the first
Without
one.
question, I don't.
Now, they get there and get back in one piece. They start a colony, whatever. I might go visit.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be the first, right?
Okay.
His death was brutal, so I'm just going to go right into it. His death was brutal.
He's straight. Okay. I thought this was going to be a redemption.
So he, on the April the 23rd, 1967, he shoots up out of the atmosphere into space. On the 24th, coming back, it begins to re-enter the atmosphere, but the parachute malfunctions. The capsule crashes to Earth, right? Through the ring of fire, right, to get back into our atmosphere. Instead of us waiting to float to the sea or the bottom of the land, it just crashes. Boom, gone. Over. Right? He's done. Dunsies. Yeah. It killed him instantly.
Yeah.
His sacrifice, though, became a grim symbol of the cost of ambition unchecked by wisdom.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Here's some things that reflect. I put some theological...
That's it? That's the whole story?
Yeah, there's probably a lot more detail I could give you. But that's what I wrote, right? That's what I put together because I was like, I don't want to write all this stuff down.
Okay.
So, but he was the first.
Yeah.
He also died. There's some theological things to think about here, right?
Okay.
So number one, let's talk about this: the weight of sacrifice. So Komarov's willingness to accept danger for the sake of others mirrors, in a small way, the sacrifice of Jesus, who says, "Greater love has no one than this: the lamb laid down his life for his friends." Now, that's a stretch, right? Komarov is not Jesus Christ. He didn't do anything for the faith's sake, right? He did it for, let's get Russia to the space first, right?
Right.
But reflecting theologically, there's some weight to the sacrifice of another, right? So that others don't have to experience, yada, yada, yada.
Okay, sure.
Let's just take Komarov, just move him aside for right now.
Yeah.
What about as a dad? Right?
Sure.
Are there sacrifices dads make, right, for the sake of their family, right?
Yeah. Okay. So your story is terrible, but your story, you can pull out some things.
A lot.
Like I didn't know that you were going to go with "and he died"
as
your story.
It's a really short story.
But I was thoughtful when you said, he's the explorer. He's the first one to do it, and so there are lots of great stories you could have picked to exemplify that idea.
More.
I'm thoughtful about, like Christopher Columbus, who went across and didn't, the Jackie Robinson first, to play base, all these firsts to do something where there is danger or animosity or something, in opposition to you, are examples of somebody who had to go out there and do something first, and better things come after.
Why did I choose the Russian cosmonaut Komarov? Because he's lesser known.
Okay.
And he was the first.
He was.
For the space race, right? So I've been looking at all space, right?
Okay.
But so for dads, right, we lay down a lot for our sons, right, our daughters, things like that, so they don't have to experience some of the heartache that we kind of have gone through, right?
Like it.
But there's also human limits and ambition, right? So I want to read this. The story of Soyuz 1 reminds us of humanity's limitations. Think about the Tower of Babel, right? They wanted to be the first. They wanted to make a name for themselves. They wanted to be great. It didn't go so well for them, right?
Nope.
Similarly, the USSR's push to dominate the space, or the space in general, at all costs, shows what happens when human pride overrides wisdom.
The cautionary tale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the third one, I'm not going to go because it really is weird. Faith in the unknown, right? So the Komarov, he stepped out first. He didn't know what was going to happen. Nobody really knew what was going to happen, right?
Right.
Wasn't a monkey the first one or a dog? I think a dog was the first one to go into space and back.
Probably.
It was something weird like that. But even then, you can't get understanding from an animal,
Sure.
right? Like, it was like this. But the faith in the unknown, right? That's big.
Yep.
I think about Peter when he steps out of the boat. Hey, if it's a ghost, I'm afraid. But if it's Jesus, tell me to come out there and I'll walk on the water with you, right? That's
Right
the
on.
unknown. Nobody's walked on water before, but I want to be the first, right? I want to come out to Jesus, right?
Okay.
And so there's moments like that. I think
The
you can
boldness of it,
that you can see in your life.
Courage.
But there's also some stupidity there. I think.
Yeah.
Like, you want to be the first in space, Russia, but what's going to happen?
Yeah.
And it was obviously death, right? But there's really not a whole lot to that story, right?
No.
If you look up the Komarov, now there's some details about their space their organization, I guess. But to that mission, there's not a whole lot that goes on there because I think there was so much swept under the rug with that.
Right.
It was like, hey, we just got to be first.
Yeah.
And
I
let's
don't know.
forget about the safety stuff.
I am not in the same place you are in terms of my learning about space right now. It's just not,
It's weird, right?
But
I'm
I
really
don't-
get deep into it.
I like that. Good. That's a cool hobby. I can't speak to much about the space race or, the who got where and how successful the Russian program was.
Well, I think without Russia, we wouldn't be where we were, right?
Yeah, sure.
We had to see their failure. We had to see their gains, right?
But I can only assume that what Vlad did led to better safety, better,
Maybe.
opportunities
I don't
for the
know.
people. Oh, okay.
I don't. I mean, Russia didn't make it, right? I mean, we did.
We made it to the moon.
Yeah.
And then what? I don't know. Was it just kind of like then why bother now?
If you really look at history, we made it to the moon, and there's two ways to go. From that moment, you can split into two different thoughts. One is we beat Russia. We ain't got to worry about it anymore. Let's forget about the space stuff, right?
Okay.
Two is we beat Russia to the moon. Now let's conquer space, get our satellites up there, get capability up there, right? If you go down that road, you're going to go to Antarctica, and you're going to see whatever machine's there that has the ability to signal from space and satellites into specific areas.
Right.
To
the civilization that lives on the backside of the moon.
No, to Earth.
Yeah.
Right.
No, but Antarctica communicates with the alien civilization that lives on the backside of the moon.
I don't go down that road. No, we have technology. We have ridiculous technology that we don't know about, right? That's for another podcast. How about this?
Okay.
In order to be the first, sometimes you've got to take a step back and really look at, what's wise, what's unwise, right? What's safe, what's unsafe. The reason I brought this up was because of the space, time, and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But it goes back to all the Advent stuff, right?
Oh.
I think you want to try to pull it in together.
I'm not going to try. I want to hear you do it.
So who was first across time and space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, right? Mm-hmm. God in the flesh comes to earth. And he says, look, I'm going to do this and sacrifice all of it, right? I'm going to go to the cross so that the people behind me, those who I save by faith after me, right, don't have to go through these same experiences. Now, if you look at the book of Revelation, there will be some who will be martyrs for the faith, right? Things like that. Mm-hmm. The sacrifice piece of Vladimir, whether he was a believer or not, I don't know, right? I'm not really worried about that. I should be worried about his faith probably, but I wasn't alive then. The sacrifice points to the sacrifice of Jesus, right? He was eternal, fully God, fully man, but he steps down and says, I'm going to be tempted as they're tempted. I'm going to live as they live. I'm going to be, but I'm going to give them the example it is to follow the law of God. He was first, right? And so he is plan A, right? You say that a lot.
I do. I like that imagery that you have built for me.
We've said it. I think we've said it like maybe the first year I was here, and we did Romans. Maybe maybe that was the heart out of the heart. I don't know, but a lot of it has come out through those studies. I like it. I like this story of Vladimir, even though it's short. I like this story because we can see some things that correlate with faith and Jesus, Advent, all that kind of stuff. To me, now whether or not I pulled that off, I don't know. I don't care. I like the story, right? And so
it's a cool story.
It's not really cool, but it's just
It's
like,
story.
It's like, man, a lot went into the space race. There's more from our side too that we did that was sketchy.
Yeah.
Just to be first, right?
Well, the fact that we didn't ever even get there and it's all a fake movie is pretty sketchy.
How dare you? No, I'm not one of the. I don't believe we didn't go to the moon. I believe we went to the moon. I heard a really good video from Elon Musk because he was asked. I think it was Joe Rogan podcast. This is not a sponsorship or anything of that. Listen to it if you want. He asked Elon Musk, how in the world did NASA forget the technology? How did we lose that technology? Elon Musk was brilliant in his answer. He said, I can build an electric car today, but unless you put effort into keeping that technology up, you're going to forget it. The next generation won't be able to do it. Think about the pyramids.
Yeah.
They built the pyramids.
Yeah.
And the generation after them, they try to build something. It looks really square and rudimentary compared to a pyramid, right?
Sure.
He said if you don't keep up with technology, it will pass you by and you will not have the knowledge to do it again. And he says the same thing with the space race. Back then, he said, we're trying to get to Mars now. He's like, I'm trying to colonize Mars.
Yeah.
And the technology is drastically different than what it was in the 60s. Yeah, just because we have the ability to do something doesn't mean we have the knowledge to keep it going.
I mean, I understand that, but write it down.
Yeah, put it in a book.
Get a recipe card, man.
Yeah.
Step 1: remember to deploy the parachute, Vlad.
I don't know what the ins and outs about the safety things with Russia. I didn't get that far into the weeds with that. The story itself was pretty interesting.
There you go.
There you go. That's a good ending to a podcast. It's a really bad ending to our podcast. But again, I will remind you, look, if you listen to this podcast, if you don't leave a comment, it hurts, right? Nobody else gets to hear it. But if you leave a comment and you rate it, so if you rate this, if you're listening to Spotify,
new and improved,
or Apple or whatever,
up and coming,
rate it so that more people will see it, right? If you don't, then we'll just be the same.
Two guys talking to our moms.
Yeah. So, hey, love God.
Love people and make disciples.